This is going to be live in just a second. Bear with me if you're waiting for me. Yep, here we go. Okay. So hello and welcome to another Technical Tuesday. Before coming to you a little bit early today, it's a busy Tuesday, apparently, in the Macri House. School starts this week, so we have a lot to get in. Housekeeping before I start today's talk. I would love any feedback on whether or not you guys are liking every other Tuesday, or if you'd rather we go back to every Tuesday. The every other is allowing me to kind of try and bring in a few guest speakers and things like that. So if you guys have liked the every other Tuesday and we like having a few more people join, we'll keep up with that. So please feel free to let us know, whether you comment or email or however you want to reach out to us. We greatly appreciate it. So please feel free to let us know how you think about the every other week Technical Tuesdays. So this week's Technical Tuesday, a little bit offbeat from our normal talks. We got a wonderful email from one of our great members who we worked with a lot over in the Hudson Park neighborhood. And one of the things she had emailed us about was an issue she had been dealing with in her backyard. And we realized it was something that we've kind of seen more often than not. And as a historic property, we've had our own issues, and the things I'm skirting around are sewer issues, actually. The member that we've been talking to had a sinkhole in her yard because she had a wooden septic tank that had completely deteriorated and had obviously given way at some point and caused this sinkhole to form in her backyard. And her email reminded me of issues that Historic Albany had on 10 Brook Street when we owned 41 10 Brook. So as we're emailing back and forth, we thought, okay, this actually might be kind of interesting, something that maybe people other than ourselves would want to hear about a little bit. So definitely nothing in depth. I'm definitely not the expert on this, but if there's interest in more in depth, we can certainly do some talks and things like that. And that's something else that we're looking to do as we move into the fall. We're looking to do more lectures and programming and things like that again. So if any of these Technical Tuesdays are of interest and you guys would like to know more about them, please let us know, and we can start filling in some of our programming with more information based on our Technical Tuesday topics. Could that be more alliterative? So sewers and things like that. So facts first, then we'll share some photos and we'll get into more interesting anecdotes and stuff like that. The interesting facts are basically Albany's main water system was put in around 1850. That's when 6 Mile Water Works, for those of you who are familiar with it, out by Railroad Avenue and whatnot. It's a great little nature preserve and everything now. So there's a small reservoir there. A lot that was constructed, and the conduits and aqueducts that run from there into downtown Albany were constructed in 1850. Actually, I'll pull up some maps as I talk about this. Forgive the clutter on my screen. I think it's easier to share the whole screen. And then I can switch back and forth to other interesting things. So, okay, maps and cool things. So in 1850, we had 6 Mile Water Works came in, and they kind of commandeered the railroad line that ran west to east, obviously through Albany. Apparently it was diverted into Tivoli Hollow. It sounds like, because my understanding with the railroads, and again, I'm not an expert, so this is my understanding, is that around 1820s, a lot of the railroad line was laid. And then by 1850, so barely 30 years later, they were rerouting it through Tivoli Hollow. And so there was a railroad line. I'm hoping all of you can see this. This is the 1876 Hopkins Map, one of my all-time favorite maps. And there's, of course, I'm pointing at the screen, you can't see it. It has this little note here that says conduit line. And for people who are fairly familiar with the west end of the city, you're going to realize that that's Melrose. That was actually the railroad line. And in 1850, that was kind of commandeered to be the water line. And so there's a conduit that goes there now. From 6 Mile Water Works, and that goes into the reservoir over at Bleecker Stadium and that whole complex over there. So you can follow the line of it. Okay, there's Melrose, it goes up and over a little bit. And once it crosses Washington Avenue, it does this weird little curve and goes back around to Central Avenue. Anyone that's, again, familiar with the western edge of the city, maybe a city historian who happens to live on a presidential street off of that, very familiar with the fact that Manning Boulevard takes this really weird turn right there. So that follows the water line that leads to the reservoir there. So really cool how early that was. It's something that I actually didn't really know until we had sewer issues at Tenbrook, how old Albany's water system really is. And I was talking with Tony Opalka, the city historian, kind of just trying to pick his brain a little bit about what would have been in Albany before that water line. And a lot of cisterns, a lot of wells. He's been going through a lot of the Common Council minutes and finding a lot about how they're digging new wells on certain blocks, or there's a cistern here. So there's a lot of water being stored. They didn't use the creeks, which was one of my questions to him, are a lot like the Ruttenkill and Foxkill and whatnot, all these creeks that were then kind of covered up, some of them fairly early on. Some of them took later, like in Sheridan Hollow, that was covered up pretty early. But the one that went through Hudson, which of course I'm going to mess it up, it's not the Fox Creek, it's the Ruttenkill. Again, I have my maps are all jumbled together. Please forgive me if I have the wrong one. That got covered up later because you can see the development didn't happen there till later in the maps. But they weren't used for fresh water. They were mostly disposal, but they were covered up actually. And so they still exist underground. There's more earthenworks and a bit of masonry and things that kind of covered up and make almost like a culvert with them. But so there was quite a bit of water there. We had wells, we had cisterns. One of the things I was asked, what's the difference? Because most people don't know what's the difference between a well and a cistern. So we had to look that up. And apparently the main difference is that wells tap the groundwater that's right there, and cisterns are more storage tanks. So it's a lot of rainwater or runoff or things like that are stored in cisterns. Water can be pumped in. It can use the water around it, but they're more of a storage than just tapping into the groundwater, which is what wells are. So there are a lot of both going on in Albany. And from a sewer standpoint, actually, there were a lot of interesting things happening. So the big public health movement with significant indoor plumbing, we're talking running water, flushable toilets, indoor baths, big thing, didn't have before, was all around 1900. And a lot of that was very new, especially in the Delaware Avenue neighborhood. It was one of the first times it was really significantly used in new buildings. All of them had indoor plumbing. Nothing was retrofitted. These buildings were built with it. And that was a big thing at the time. But indoor plumbing wasn't necessarily new then. Tony was telling me how on Madison Place, several of the houses there actually had, we're going to go with indoor plumbing, whether there were storage tanks or whatnot, he wasn't quite sure. But they had basically indoor privies that were connected to a rough line that would then obviously leave the building. Whether that tied into kind of a trunk line, that my assumption would be it went into the Hudson. But again, of interest, we can certainly do a bit more research and have a great talk about that. But just interesting tidbits and things. So as early as the 1840s, you could have potentially flushing privies in your home. You have to go outside and in cold and whatnot. So that's just kind of a little bit of the background there. Some of the anecdotes that I wanted to share was that you don't always know where your sewer line comes and goes. Most of them follow the streets. So it's something that you don't really think about a whole lot. But there are all these weird problems that arise. And if you live in a downtown neighborhood, you've probably been the subject of one. Whether you're a member with her wooden septic tank, or if you saw there was a newspaper article about how on Broadway they found a wooden pipe, basically. It had been a log, I think, that had been hollowed out and functioned as essentially a sewer pipe that ran right into the Hudson. And they didn't know that that was still what it was doing, because it hadn't broken since it had been put in, which is kind of amazing. So there are all these quirky little things. When we owned St. Joe's Church, there was a toilet in it, but there was no record of the church ever having been connected to the city water. So the question is, was there a well on site, or perhaps a cistern or something that it connected to feed it with water? I mean, and there was a flush toilet at the time, whether it was initially a flush toilet, maybe it was a privy that was kind of in a closet. And the question is, did it tie into the sewer line, or did it just go into the ground and find its way from there? And that's entirely possible. No one really researched it. But one of the interesting things that we came across that I think is definitely more prevalent in the city than we know is where, instead of having sewer lines where yours just goes right out to the street in front of you, which is kind of the logical thing that most people would think about, gravity is something we have to think about way more. And so if you're along that hill, a lot of lines don't necessarily run out to the street, they go downhill. So it depends on the shape of your parcel, And the impetus for that was when we owned 41 Tenbrook, for anyone who's not totally familiar with the street, the house or the facade that's at 41 Tenbrook faces Tenbrook Street. It's on the east side of the street. So the back slopes down toward the Hudson. And we didn't realize, even though there's no building there, we had a major sewage issue there back in 2010. There were neighbors on Tenbrook complaining about issues with their water. I think things weren't flushing and whatnot, or they were noticing sewery smells and all kinds of bad stuff. So the water department was wonderful, and they ended up coming out and they did dye tests on a lot of houses right around there. And we found that both 39, 41, 43, and 45. So a whole row of buildings where 41 is now missing. There's no building there, so there's nothing tying into it. Obviously, the pipes are still there, but there was no building feeding into the system. They all came together, and actually, let me show you or share with you the map. So these crudely drawn maps that you can see here exist down at the water department. So if you're ever digging in your backyard, like substantially, it might not be a bad idea to check in with them to just see if they know of anything going on, because we had no idea all of this was there. And so we found that let me see, there's a cleaner one. I think this is the better one. But yeah, so 4 houses, they all came together on one trunk line, as it's called. And so they all merged together in the back of 41 Tenbrook. And the pipes somewhere in there had been crushed. Our presumption was that it was during the demolition of 41 Tenbrook years and years before, because they all heavy equipment on the backyard. And they found they were clay pipes that went down the hill and actually tied it into North Pearl Street, which no one would have ever figured out. So we ended up having to do all new lines running to it. And then we had to have an easement with someone, and it now goes out toward Wilson Street. So it's this weird shape now and things like that. So there are all these weird things that happen with older buildings and stuff that you don't think about. It's not just the building, it's tied into all these different things. So just interesting things to think about and whatnot. But if there's any interest in sewer lines and stuff like that, we can definitely do a bit more of a talk about that. Let me see if I can share a few more maps that we have. Let me see, that was the western half of the city. Here's another bit. Again, western half of the city that shows a bit more detail of the conduit running from 6 Mile Waterworks. And then it goes up to the north, and then around here's where that kind of North Manning bit is. There's a lot of really great maps of this. Like I said, this one's the 1876 Hopkins map. So if anyone's interested, we can certainly share those. We'll post some pictures of this. And then the last thing I want to share were just some interesting, fun pictures from all of the stuff that we had done over at 41 Tenbrook, because it was just so wild. It was really crazy. I don't know if hopefully all of you guys can see all of this. We had to regrade the whole back of it. And they did all of this trenching. I wish we still had the pipe, but I don't think that was one of the things that was kept. Here's the map that the water department actually did for us, showing where everything was kind of coming in and going. And it shows you here how kind of wonky everything is. So apparently even the 2 buildings on the end of the street by Wilson, they don't even go out to Tenbrook, because obviously everything flows downhill. Yeah, it was just really bizarre. So there's lots of weird and interesting things that kind of pop up. So food for thought as you're doing stuff in your yards, and as things come up. We know there's always sewer and whatnot issues. See if we have any other fun photos. Yes, so here are a couple photos of the trenching that happened to lay all of these lines in the back of 41 Tenbrook. It was definitely an interesting experience, to say the least. So with that, I think I will leave you all on your very nice and sunny Tuesday. Feel free, if you have questions and whatnot, feel free to ask. We can certainly hit the experts up and see if they have the answers if we don't have them internally. And as I said, let us know about the schedule if you like every other Tuesday, if you'd rather we go back. And please, topics. I would love to have your thoughts on topics. I tend to pick things that come up in the week before or 2 weeks before as we're planning them. So it's a little bit more current and of interest, but please feel free, send us your questions. Just as a hint, wood windows are coming back up, because as we all know now, fall is approaching. So we'll be talking a bit about tightening our windows up and maybe doing a couple of site visits. So we have some fun, exciting things planned. So on that note, I will leave you all. Thank you so much for joining me and have a wonderful week.